Okay?
So, I have a
You
question.
can't ask questions. I'm sorry. I don't want expert questions.
So, I have an application. Should I go through these score items, let's say, and score it where things I actually fit into this? For example, whether my application is how does it deal with information, competitives, personalizations, and control? Would that help as an exercise?
Absolutely. So, for example, if you were doing a consumer thing, you had a thing, you said, my application or my thinking is an information aggregator. It has direct control to how you can customize an experience, and that information, the way it's controlled, links to a social media experience. It's not 3 times better, it's 9 times better. So the more you can hit these, and by the way, these are mine, I just made them up, so there might be better ones. But I would say that the more you can hit these spots, the more likely you are to have something that's a winner. Okay? So quickly, just some areas that I would say if I were a technologist or an entrepreneur that I would watch. And I'm going to a bias on my own part just a second. So, apps, the world of mobile apps, not just the mobile channel, but very specifically mobile apps. Just put this in your head. iPhone 5 equals a wallet. Don't forget that. And make it, you got to make that distinction in your head between just mobile stuff and the mobile app world. Outsourcing. Banks are going to be outsourcing more and more and more. Pay attention, though, to where banks are outsourcing. Understand that if you're going to go after banking business, know where the relationships are because, again, at least cross-country borders, there may be some protectionism and so on. So that could, which you can leverage to your advantage, of course. The next one is an obvious one. We all know this, but I think it's worth dwelling on, which is personal financial management. The PFM acronym. As technologies proliferate and as services proliferate and other things happen, there are opportunities to create personal financial management applications and systems. If you're familiar with Mint.com, that's the best example I can think of. And if you're interested in that, just go play around with that. But all you have to do is remember, in PFM, individuals want to see a big picture. And if you play with bank websites, you might be amazed by how infrequently it is the case that you can get a good picture of your own finances from your own bank's website. Particularly if you're asking what to do questions and what if questions. So for personal financial management, think of a big picture, an aggregated, complete information gathering for the individual consumer. Payments, we all know, what?
PFM is typically about my own banking versus business banking. And if you go cross-border, it becomes trickier here. In the region, you need multiple bank accounts often because most banks don't service all the countries you operate in.
Right.
And therefore, when you deal between payments and PFM, you've got another one that's business financial management. My small business partner here needs me to sign off on something. Most of the banking systems don't make that easy.
Right.
And you have to know all the passwords to get into every account from every place else. So I'm just drawing a thread through here that I think you've got one other dimension, which is
Cool.
business
I'll put that in.
and multi-country.
And that speaks to the control issue, needing control. Payments we've talked about. We have an expert in the house about payments will be a big deal. So will social media. Most of the days, nowadays, if you hear somebody say they're working on social media, you ought to hold your money because somebody's going to lose money. Most social media efforts are failing for lots of reasons. But I think if you wrote this down and did this right, this is a $1 billion sentence. I really believe this. I'm going to try it. So see if y'all get this. Social media has been a huge puzzle for banks. Banks don't have a clue. The things that banks do in social media are hapless and silly, and they're embarrassingly bad. But banks are beginning to understand, and consultants are beginning to understand that if you can take social media and marry it to CRM and have your social media tool become your CRM, you've got something huge on your hand. And it gets very, very complex. But if I were young and I wanted to make a lot of money, I'd write down social media equals CRM. And I'd remember that, and I'd start thinking about that, and I'd read a lot about that, and I'd look for opportunities because that may be a big one. The cloud, of course, internal and external, play in the cloud, particularly with information sharing, security, blah, 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 all kinds of things. Next to the last, my favorite place of my heart is data analysis, insight, and real data mining. And I put real in quotation marks because I don't think hardly anybody in banking or in many places has ever done a highly effective job of marrying data mining to strategic implementations in the marketing world. Almost never. There are huge opportunities in here, both strategic and technical, and they're in banking, they're going to be there for a long time. And then the other one is the simple one, which is kind of like a second cousin to social media, which is collaboration tools for both internal collaboration in large organizations and collaboration with customers external to the organization. And we may play with some of these in just a second, but right now, these are just some, if you're thinking strategically, and I'm a technologist or I'm a developer and entrepreneur, these are big buckets of things where there's a lot of room to play and develop and create things. And where people have not done a very good job. So, where to focus? If you got all this stuff, now we're getting to where, well, this is what I think. You can find somebody else who thinks, you can find plenty of people who think differently. This is my gospel. Banking, like all businesses, is going to be in a weird state of flux for quite some time. Bankers are cowards. Often, they are. Bankers are cowards. They're afraid to take risks. They're always second adopters. I was one, I can say that. They're second adopters or third or whatever. They're real slow to take on new things. But efficiency and cost issues are going to push banks to be have a little more appetite for risk and adopting technologies that can either save them money, which would be the first thing they'll look for, or secondly, have a credible story to tell about making more money, and their tactical risk appetite may very well increase. And if you're doing stuff for banks, anything that you can go to a banker and say, this gives you a strategic advantage is going to sell, because it's a world of commodity and vanilla mostly out there. It's all the same. Strategic competitive advantage will sell. So, here's the lesson. For what it's worth. As a working hypothesis, let's assume, just as a hypothesis, that there are three primary technology areas of emphasis for development, entrepreneurial creation. Bearing in mind first, if I don't get lost, a cartoon courtesy of Scott, which I think is important. It's not what the software does, it's what the user does. Let's just stop and remind ourselves of that. It's not the cool thing you're making and all the twists and turns. It's what the user of the technology does. Hypothesis, there are three things. These are the three things that I believe are going to be big. Number one is mobile. Okay? We all know that. If you knew that when you got up this morning, that's nothing new. Mobile products are going to rule. And I believe there comes a time when the bank has its internal mobile app store that you access to manage your finances. It'll be the equivalent of a customized PFM, is what it amounts to. We know that. Mobile has to allow you multiple choices across multiple devices, it's like the wild, wild west. A huge problem always is going to be security, encryption. Who is going to carry that message? Who's going to accompany that message, and what encryption goes along with it? And here's something I think is important. Soon, the device, in 5 years, this is my bank. I don't mean it's going to function like my bank and so on. This is the bank. And it's really important to use the word is. So in a sense, in my view, mobile banking is the fulfillment of branchless banking, which I stood in front of the corporate board of First Union in 1990 and announced the arrival of branchless banking about 30 years too early, because it didn't work out that way. Mobile banking may very well be the fulfillment of branchless banking Devices and apps become more ubiquitous and more complete. The device and the app are the portal to your institution, not the branch, and not even people. So we'll see. So that's mobile is a place. This is where my heart is. This is where my thinking is. This is where what I'm doing personally, this is where I am. Data mining, and although I'm talking about banking, you could talk about this in 90% of the entities, businesses you see. Data mining has lagged in effective deployment, always. The reason is that almost always the data mining technology has been the lead. So here somebody says, hey, we could get all these computers and turn them on, look what they do, but there was never a business strategy. So data mining was deployed, data mining did, people found out stuff, but nothing ever happened. The issue here is what it turned out to be, what can we know versus how can we use the insight. I'm gonna go a little bit faster because I want to get to something. The analytics issue is more of a market issue than a technical. If you want to get into data mining, data analytics, remember that it's not the technology. And just for the sake of going a little bit fast so we can talk some, data analysis is the single most important of the most important things, and it's the one where there's the least consistent success right now, with a couple of big exceptions. And the cloud, we all know this. We don't need to spend any time on it. You know, platform as a service, database as a service, software as a service, blah, blah, blah. The things you know are driving are how to allocate costs, how to track the costs, how to scale things, blah, blah, blah. And I think that you could just take it as an article of faith that the cloud is the real thing. If you can find ways to work in this space and do things in this space that affect banking, do it, because it's going to be there. So banking's going to be around. Banking's not fast. There's a lot of things you can look out for. There's 3 things in particular. And what I would like to offer is a very simple, I think. So, if all that's true, how can you find the best opportunities? And if you're an entrepreneur and all this stuff is out there, how can you focus your own thinking in a way that allows you to find the right opportunity to just focus on? That would be the question. We discuss it. I skipped a slide. This is what I would offer for the sum of everything about technology and banking. If you do a Venn diagram of the cloud, mobile, and data, there's a place in the middle where they all 3 overlap. And if you draw a point right dead center, the really cool entrepreneurial developments that occur in banking in the coming years are going to be those that incorporate elements of data analysis, the cloud, and mobility. So if you were talking about how you use those things as a score, if you say to yourself, I'm getting ready to do something, it's really innovative in cloud utilization, it is a leader in data analysis, and it's mobile, I bet you win. You've got to, because that's almost a fail-safe test. You do something really good in data by itself, you're going to be fine, if you've got some breakthrough. You add a mobility feature to that and you quintuple your chances of the 2 together being successful. You put all 3 of them together and it's 18 times as likely to be successful. So that's really, when I think about this, banking is a real boring place. I spent my whole life in it. Banking as a rule is just kind of boring, and bankers can be very boring people. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff, a lot of forces going on in banking, and for the right entrepreneur and the right innovator who can go in there and get solutions to some of these places, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And so with this, I'm going to change that. I'd like to invite any questions or challenges or discussions.